All right, hello, and welcome back to the Chase Thomas Podcast, taping this on a Wednesday afternoon. Old friend Wes Goldberg is here. Wes, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
When's the next piece coming up on the Substack?
So the Substack is laying dormant for a little while right now. There's some irons in the fire, as they say, some new projects going on. TBD on that stuff. But yeah, no immediate plans for the Substack. Got some other things going on.
I was gonna say, because like it was one of my favorites, and the Max Strus piece was really, really fun. I really liked learning about Max, and thought you did a really good job with that one. So I had to ask, because I noticed it's been like a month since the last one. So I was like, hey, when's Wes gonna start writing again? When's the article coming out?
Yeah, it's been sort of a bridge to some other things. That was sort of always the intent with it. And so I've been working just with some other outlets and things like that to try to get it out there on something that's not Substack. I never liked the idea of a paywall in the first place, and I just believe that people should be able to consume your product. And so yeah, I don't know. I just we'll see. Though it won't be the last Substack article, but there's some other things that are going to be coming out in other places.
Okay, there you go. Very kind of, hey, what's the word I'm looking for? Very
Coy?
say it again.
Coy, maybe?
Coy, maybe. Yeah, maybe
Cards
it's
close
coy.
to the vest.
Yeah, I like it. I like
Yeah.
it. Well, I'm sure it will be great, whatever it is, Wes. We want to start here with the Nets, because Kevin Durant and the boardroom in Brooklyn unanimously, or they came to the table, and both of their logos are on the official Notes app statement that things are good, and that Kevin Durant and his Rich Kleiman and Joe Tsai and Sean Marks and Steve Nash all got together, and they're going to now do this thing ostensibly for the 2022-2023 NBA season. What was your first reaction when you saw that it was actually like, okay, Kevin Durant is staying for at least one more year in Brooklyn?
Thank God that it's over. That was sort of my first response was, all right, cool. This is sort of headed where everybody thought it was going to end up going, because there's just no trade out there. If there had been a trade out there that made any kind of sense, um, it probably would have had already been done. And it was so interesting. One of the things I kept wondering is, all right, Kevin Durant demands a trade a couple months ago. You're going to get a flood of offers. Every team is going to call, hey, what is it going to cost for Kevin Durant? And we all heard the reports that Brooklyn was asking for some crazy amount of assets back, and blue chip young players and all-stars and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe that happens, but maybe not. And I think within the first couple of weeks, Brooklyn got the offers, and they kind of knew what it was going to be. And all this stuff about, hey, Memphis is now in the mix, and Boston and all that kind of stuff just felt to me more like reporting late on things that had happened, much earlier in the process, and the reporting came out. But, I was just waiting for something to just sort of shake the environment a little bit, something to just, cause some ripples and force somebody's hand, whether it be Brooklyn or another team, to offer more. Maybe there's another player on another team that demands to be traded or something like that. And then that player could get traded to Brooklyn, like whatever it was. And that thing just never happened. And then you have Kevin Durant meeting with Joe Tsai in London, trying to force that thing to occur, trying to force that ripple effect, trying to shake up the environment himself by demanding Steve Nash and Sean Marks to be fired if he were not traded. And Joe Tsai called his bluff, and he was like, you know what, that's not going to do it. And the environment was not shaken. And ultimately, we just ended up back to where we were 2 months ago, which was Kevin Durant is still on the Brooklyn Nets. It's just a little bit more awkward now. But these are all competitors. They're all big boys. They're going to get over it, and they're going to try to, I think, make the most of this season. But that was sort of my first response was, yeah, okay, nothing really changed. Finally, we're done with this.
It's also just, I would love to be on the final wall for that conversation, like the first time Kevin sees Sean and Steve after that getting out. Like, because if you're Sean and Steve, you have to, like, that's a level of professionalism and just leaving your pride at the door that I think would be mighty difficult for a lot of folks to just be like, yeah, we'll welcome this guy back in after he tried to get me fired. Like, that's I can only imagine how difficult of a situation that is. And like, did Kevin apologize? Like, I'm sure that was probably not there. And like you said, it's like the competitive part of all of this is that like, do they just all chalk it up to the game of like, hey,
Right.
Kevin, we get it. It was a leverage pull, and you were saying like, hey, we wanted to, but at the same time, I don't know what you say to like fix this. And it the Nets are going to be like they're a team that we're just going to look at, and I think it's an exercise in like how much does chemistry actually matter
Mhm.
in the NBA is what we're about to find out in Brooklyn this year, right?
I mean, yes, number one. And the fact that Kevin Durant has always wanted to play with Kyrie Irving and that Kyrie will, I think, be playing more games than he did last year until he finds a new reason to not play basketball. But so the fact that they want to play together helps the chemistry just because those are the two best players on the team. So maybe that's there. I don't know if it becomes sort of like a common enemy thing. Can that work if it's like sort of KD and Kyrie versus management? We've seen that kind of work in the past where like the Kobe Shaq dynamic, and things like that. I don't know. Um, you mentioned whether or not Kevin Durant is going to apologize or what that having covered KD a little bit when he was with Golden State, like that's not somebody who says sorry. And I
Right.
don't see that happening. And Steve Nash was kind of hired, and people thought that okay, he comes from like that Steve Kerr coaching tree a little bit, like kind of a West Coast guy, given where he spent most of his career. Like maybe he's a little bit more chill, but this is a guy who won 2 MVPs. Like that's not a dude who's just a pushover, right? You don't win 2 MVPs and get to where he was as a Hall of Famer by being sort of just chill and pushover. That dude's a competitive MFer, and I
Mhm.
think that's maybe the way to do it is to approach KD and be like, and then just have it out a little
Mhm.
bit, right? Like the way that Draymond Green would approach KD and have it out with him in Golden State. And obviously that ended up pushing Kevin Durant, at least somewhat was a factor out, out of Golden State and towards Brooklyn. But at least for a year, would that be enough? I just wonder what the common enemy is going to be. And I kind of just see it already.
Mhm.
How are they going to turn this into a media thing, like some sort of contrived media narrative? I'm just waiting for that to happen. Where you mentioned being like a fly on the wall for it. I'm thinking about flying up to Brooklyn for media day because I can't wait for that, dude. That is going to be crazy. Steve Nash, how do you feel about coaching a player who demanded you to be fired? What does
Mhm.
Steve Nash say to that? Kevin Durant, when he has to answer media day questions, if by the way the Brooklyn Nets PR team make him answer the questions, because I
I was
would
gonna
bet
say,
Kevin Durant.
didn't the Knicks just do the whole Jalen Brunson introduction with no media present?
Yeah, and that's a bad path to go down,
Yeah.
but I can't imagine doing it for media day because it's one thing for an introductory press conference. It's another thing to not allow media to talk to the players on a day made for media.
Mhm.
Seems a little wild to me. But I don't Kevin Durant's going to be asked these questions. Kyrie's going to be asked these questions. Steve Nash is going to be asked these questions. And there's nowhere to hide. Your owner acknowledged that all these things were happening with his tweet, right? Like he
Mhm.
publicly acknowledged it. Had he not done that, by the way, and had they not done the public acknowledgement with this weird statement that they did, they could have just always leaked everything to Shams this whole time as they were doing before, and Woj and all these other guys, and then just come out on media and be like, this never even happened. This was all
Mhm.
some media narrative that was way overblown, which would have been fake, but at least you would have had some sort of something to stand behind, right? And now the
Mhm.
fact that your owner and your front office has basically acknowledged that all these trade requests and these rumors have been true this entire time, where do you hide? And I know that it's almost impossible to turn it against the media, but I still feel like the way that this team has operated and the way that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving operate, which is it's the media against us all the time, they'll find a way to flip it. And I just can't wait to see how they're going to try.
And this is probably it's just so weird because think about the other moves that they're making while this is going on and while the stuff behind the scenes is just crazy and not sure what's gonna happen with Kyrie, not sure what's gonna happen with KD. It's like, oh, we're gonna give up a first for Royce O'Neal. We're gonna go sign TJ
Right.
Warren. It's very strange that they were operating under the assumption it seems like they were going to continue to contend and continue to build around their core. So they've just had such a weird offseason because I look at this group and you look at they probably need another big. That's like something
Mhm.
that stands out. Like Claxton, I like a lot, but I mean Sharp, we'll see if he's a backup five, and KD can obviously play backup five, and it looks like the report today Ben Simmons might even start at the five. Maybe that's what they try and do, but that's we'll see how
Yeah,
much
I don't
Ben
believe that
Simmons
for a
wants to
second.
do that. can we also just see Ben Simmons play basketball for a little bit before we start penciling him in as like, yeah, I'll just be the Bruce
Before we start
Brown for you
changing
guys.
his position, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a TBD. But you look at it, Kyrie, Patty, Cam Thomas, Seth Curry, Joe Harris, TJ Warren, Royce O'Neal, KD, um, Ben Simmons, Nick Claxton, like that's a pretty deep team. And it's a deep team of mostly vets who you can count on, who you would assume KD and Kyrie would trust and like. And it's 8, 9, 10 deep that you feel pretty good about. Like I like that KD is staying in Brooklyn because the East is far more interesting now. Like I think the Boston stuff was fascinating, and I think that was probably the most intriguing trade option for KD just because of Boston having to kind of the ultimate question of like, well, Tatum and KD beating them 4 times in a 7-game series seems
Right.
pretty unlikely for a lot of teams in this league if they're both healthy. Like that's just a really hard thing to stop that level of firepower for a healthy run from the two of them. We also just got to the finals with this core, but then you go back the other way. Like I just imagine Brad Stevens just pacing around his office and being like, we were 500 in February. Like this was not a great situation, and we
Right.
were almost at a point where we have to trade somebody because this was not working. Is that really who we were? Is it a Hawk situation where it's like, oh, we just got hot at the right time and we made the Eastern Conference Finals? Let's run it back. We're fine. We'll just get right back to the NBA Finals next year. That was so fascinating to me because I could understand it from
Yeah.
so many different angles. But now that KD is there and Boston's running it back with this group, Miami's not going anywhere, and we'll get to them in a second. The Sixers have reloaded. I think they're better and probably have the best chance of being the number 1 seed going into the NBA playoffs next year. I just go up and down the list where I'm like, the East is wide open, and there are so many cases to be made for so many different teams, right?
There is. And to your point about Brooklyn, I really like their depth. I kind of
Mm,
like how they somehow managed to deepen their team while all this Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving stuff was happening. You're right. They probably needed a backup center, but that's it. Uh, I do wonder if Boston ends up regretting not doing this trade at some point because we're already getting the rumblings that Jaylen Brown could end up being unhappy in Boston at some point. And Jaylen Brown is, let's call him an independent thinker. You know, I
mhm.
wouldn't. He's not quite the flat earther that Kyrie Irving is, but he is somebody who considers himself a little bit of a maverick in a sense that he doesn't want to go with trends and that he's willing to kind of make his own path, and that's sort of always been part of his identity. I'm
He's
not
a
knocking him
Kanye
for
guy
that, by the
too, I
way.
think. Isn't he
What's
a
that?
Kanye guy?
He's a big Kanye guy. Yeah,
Yes.
he's and so if Kanye gets in his ear one day and is just in a mood where he says, "You know what? You should not be in Boston," and Jaylen
Mm.
Brown wants to listen to him, who knows? But yeah, I do wonder if a couple years from now, when Jaylen Brown is entering free agency, if Boston turns around and like, wait, this guy's gonna leave us, and we could have dealt him a couple years ago for Kevin Durant, and we never got
Mm.
back to the NBA Finals because, hey, by the way, Brooklyn got good and KD and Kyrie Irving figured it out, or Philadelphia finally figured it out and got all the way to the finals when Joel Embiid became MVP and all that kind of stuff. And, we had this opportunity right in front of us to go ahead and win a championship. There's a world where that happens. And I do wonder if maybe we're going down that path because even 2 years from now, or even a year from now, I mean, Kevin Durant is going into his age 34 season. We all know that. And that's why it was so kind of hard to trade for him. Um, but you would still rather have 34-year-old Kevin Durant coming off of a season where he was averaging 30 points a game than 36-year-old Kevin Durant. And I like if Jaylen Brown tells the Celtics front office, "Hey, like I'm out of here," or if they get the sense that he's out of there, and then you try to come back and make this trade down the line, I don't think you can do it. Number one, I don't know if Brooklyn is open to Kevin Durant trades the way that they just were. And two, is Kevin Durant going to be that same player a year and 2 years from now? I don't know. And so, yeah, I do wonder if Boston is going to turn around and just think, boy, we really kind of messed that up because Golden State was in the finals. They lost to Cleveland, and they went ahead and made the Kevin Durant acquisition.
Mm.
It didn't cost them anything. They were just able to sign him. So there's that. It just cost them Harrison Barnes. So I shouldn't say anything. Harrison Barnes was a good player for them, but um, and so it's a little bit different for Boston where you have to give up one of your core young pieces, but still, like just because you made it to the finals does not mean you can't improve your roster in a dramatic way. And maybe this was the opportunity for the Celtics to do that, and they missed it.
I am right there with you. But I also understand of like, I don't want to bring the KD that we know now
Also that.
behind the scenes into the building. Like, I understand that part of it too, of just
Yeah,
like, do we really want to bring KD into the building? Like, we now know how this is going to go behind the scenes, and it's not going to be roses. Like, is
yeah.
it worth it to get a title with KD and Jason Tatum, even if it means just maybe some really uncomfortable, just stressful couple years of the two of them together? Like, what is it worth it? Is
Right,
it?
right.
I don't know. Like, that's a
Yeah,
fair
I'm not
conversation to have.
knocking Boston for not doing it. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
it was a tough decision for a reason, right?
Yes.
Um, if you were willing, the part that baffles me is if you were willing to include Jalen Brown, that to me would have been the part that I would have pushed back against. But it sounds like the reporting around this, and who knows how accurate it was that, hey, we'll give you Jalen Brown, but we're not going to give up Marcus Smart. We'll give you like a smaller piece for that in return because we're not going to give up two of our core pieces, which I get. Again, I
Yeah.
understand it, but if you were already willing to give up Jalen Brown, like why was the hang up
Brad
Marcus
Stevens
Smart?
just really loves Marcus
He
Smart.
really does, man. I don't
Hmm.
know. It just seems weird.
I
Whole
mean,
thing
maybe
is
it's a
weird.
chemistry thing where it's just like
Yeah.
he's the heart and soul, and it's just like that's too rocky for us
Right.
to bring in KD and move on from Marcus Smart. Like that's just too much.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I look at that right now in Atlanta. I mean, Dejounte is showing a completely different side of Dejounte Murray this summer that nobody had seen in San Antonio.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, how does this work with
Yeah.
Dejounte and Trae? Where it's like, what if he's just been like, I'm the leader and I'm the alpha, and Trae, he's gonna just look at Trae in game 12 and be like, hey, why aren't you off ball? I need you in the corner, Trae. I need you to go over there, and I'll feed you when I can. Like, how does that work? We don't know, because a lot of these superstars where I think it's a respect thing. You can tell that there's just certain guys that like, oh, I've played against them or I've seen them, like they're good. I respect them. I'll do this for this kind of player. It sounds good in theory. And then you put them together and then the minutes start adding up and you're like, oh, I don't know. I respect this game, but I don't like what I'm now having to actually do to make this all work. And it was like one of those, you just have to play it out. So all these Hawks fans who are like, oh, I can't wait to all-star guards, it's like, it's great. Yeah, it could work. Like, it could be fine. Trey's also had a 30+% usage forever, and he's never
Mhm.
played with a guard with a 30+% usage. And Dejounte Murray, like, he's never been asked to do any of this. This is going to be tough. Like, this is going to be extremely mercurial, and I could go two different ways. Like, either this
Right.
ends with them working and maybe an Eastern Conference finalist appearance again in the next 2 years, or Trey's gone because this goes completely off the rails. Trae hates it. The organization has to back one of the two. They don't want to play with each other because it just doesn't work. Like, this is the NBA. That's how it works. Like, either this works really well or Trae's out and he hates all of this and he's like, y'all screwed me. Y'all did whatever. Like, that's
Right.
just how it goes.
Yeah, there's no middle version of this where they're
Yes.
just sort of a bubble team for a while and
Yeah.
everybody's just
No.
copacetic. Like that doesn't exist. And
Mm-mm.
yeah, like it goes one of two ways. You're exactly right. The worst version of it is sort of what we just saw happen in LA with LeBron and Russell Westbrook,
Mm-hmm.
where like you said, Russell Westbrook, there's mutual respect between the two players, but
Yep.
then they get together and like, you know what? I'm not going to screen for this guy. Are you kidding me? And it's
Mm-hmm.
just not going to happen. And then the other version of it is sort of what LeBron had with Dwayne Wade in Miami, where it took about a year for them to figure it out, but they've ultimately figured it out. And Wade took
Mm-hmm.
a step back for LeBron. And there's been other versions of that too. But what I'm really excited about is for the Hawks fans online to start just desperately defending their backcourt.
Mm.
Like where everybody's like, clearly this is not working, right? Like if this were the case where it's a little rocky and raw, and they quite can't figure it out. And if
Mm-hmm.
that's the case for Hawks fans, just be like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. They're the perfect fit together. Why would you ever bash them? Because fans love to defend backcourts. Like
Mm-hmm.
we just saw that with Portland. They defended Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum for years. And good, you're fans. It's what you're supposed to do. You got to do it. And they did a really good job of it. And then ultimately what had happened? They never won a championship and they had to split them up. That's just what's going to happen. And I do
House of
wonder if
Guards in DC with Beal and Wall for years.
same thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, no, it's the best backcourt in the league. You guys don't know what you're talking about. We're on our way to a championship. We just need to get three other players who can do anything, and that never happened. And so I wonder if that's sort of where we're going down with Atlanta, because on paper, like I understand the fit, but you're right. The fact that they're both high usage and so young,
Yeah.
right? Like they're so young. I don't know if they're going to be ready to take steps
It would
back
be
in their
better if one of
respective
them was a
games,
vet. It would be better if
right?
one of them was
Or
like had
both.
been in the league 8 or 9 years.
Right, like LeBron and D Wade, who we just
Mhm.
talked, like they were 28, 29, 30 years old when that was happening. And so D-Wade had already won a championship. LeBron
Yes.
had already ascended to be the best player in the league and had all the accolades and all these things. And so that made more sense. But it's so hard for young players to do it because they're still sort of like Dejounte Murray just made his first All-Star game. You think he wants that to be his last All-Star game? No way. He's trying to make more of them. Trae Young wants to be the best player and the best point guard in the league, right? And he's on track to maybe be that. Who knows? And so, yeah, like it's going to
This
be
is
hard
still a
convincing them.
business. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they can say like championship, we'll do whatever it takes to sacrifice. It's like 23 and you're just looking like you said, your first All-Star game, and like where contracts depend on all NBA appearances and
Yes.
bonuses and more money, and like there are some business aspects to this that may drive you more. It's like, yeah, it'd be cool to get a ring, but it would also be cool to just get that extra whatever million
Right.
by being the kind of player that I want to be on the floor, even if it means we're not contenders. Like that's a reality. But I think there's going to be a buffer, I will tell you, on the Hawks stuff, where the buffer will be Nate, who has been very bad at rotations and is not going, I don't think he's going to stagger Dejounte and Trae first. So the first pillar will be, because like the final thing with the Hawks is going to be the next coach. So I just don't like, I'm going to reserve judgment until a young coach comes in or whoever, a more innovative coach who I have a bigger belief in maximizing Onyeka Okongwu, Dejounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, and Trae Young. But I think we're going to see that immediately. Like you're going to see on Twitter where it's like, oh my God, he's pulling Dejounte and Trae out again. And it just, you're going to see that early because he loves all bench lineups. Like that's one of Nate's things. He loves all bench lineups, and the numbers back that up. And I think that will just be one of the early things where it's like, you got to stop. Like every media session will be, hey, what was the thinking of the 6 minutes where Trae and Dejounte were both sitting? Like that's rule number one is stagger them for the whole game. There's really no reason for at least one of them to be on the floor at any given time.
Right.
And then after that, we'll see. But I don't know. At the same time, it's still exciting, right? Like it's cool to have two all NBA guards in your backcourt, and it's the Hawks. Like there's no history for this. There's no history of two all NBA guys. And I mean, you just stumble into a top 5 offense with Trae. Like Trae is that good now where I just don't see a way for the offense to not still be one of the league's best. It's just more of like, are they going to be happy off the court? Are they going to be happy with their personalities where Trae's not surrendering the lead guard role, and Dejounte's like, well, I'm not really a spot up shooter, so I need to create, and I'm not just going to be the guy who just does everything on defense and grinds, and also just like, I'm not going to be your Marcus Smart. That's not going to be what this is going to be for me.
Right. No, and I think like if this is going to work, it's going to get Trae Young off the ball a little bit more. And so this is one of the things that we've been talking about with Trae Young is like the next part of his evolution is to get off the ball a little bit and sort of lean into that catch and shoot ability that he has, but that he hasn't really been able to tap into because they don't really have another ball handler. And so on one hand, it's like, well, you have another ball handler on the roster. And we're talking about how that's a bad thing because it's like the only one basketball argument. But on the other hand, didn't you want somebody else that can handle the ball a little bit more and get Trae Young off the ball more often? And so that would be the case for that. I'm sure they're going to have to stagger their minutes at some point. We'll see if Nate McMillan ends up doing it or not. But there's also like, you also want them playing together quite a bit because in crunch time, they're going to have to know how to play off of each other. And obviously there's a way to do that. First and fourth quarters, they play together. Second, third quarters, you stagger them. Done. That's how most of those rotation patterns work. So, yeah, it's just sort of, it's not that the basketball fit is bad, right? We almost kind of go to this whole, part where if you have like 3 really good players, all of a sudden, no matter what the players are, we all start talking about, well, how are they going to fit one basketball, this whole thing? It's like, all right, I understand that maybe it's going to be a little clunky, but wouldn't you rather have those like 2 or 3 really good players as opposed to just one really good player and then just like 4 or 5 mediocre players? Yeah, obviously, if you look at teams that win championships, they have the really good players on them. And that's just sort of the rule. But so on paper, it makes sense. But what is interesting is the personality part. That's why we saw Chris Paul and Devin Booker work, because Chris Paul was just like, yo, I'm just here. Pay me. I want to be in a winning team and I want to go try to win a championship. And I'm going to elevate Devin Booker and DeAndre and all these other guys. That's why that partnership worked. The personality thing is going to be so interesting. They almost have to go into this and just be like, hey, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Let's just be the best backcourt instead of just being the best individual players. And if if you're Nate McMillan, that's almost the message that you have to send is you guys could go be the best backcourt in the NBA. And if you do that, all those individual accolades will come and you're going to win more than you ever have.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. That's the whole thing. That is entirely possible, but like we've said, there's no middle ground here. Either this goes really well or this implodes and the Hawks are without both of these guys 3 years from now. That's just NBA. That's where we're at. I was not expecting to talk to some Hawks, but it's fun. And I had to just have some Hawks optimism after what the Heat did in round one this past year.
Sorry about that.
My question to you about the Knicks, though, and then we'll get some Heat stuff in here. Because this is something that we're not talking about, because we were talking about the East, and now that KD is staying ostensibly for another year in Brooklyn, that's a team that we were like gonna maybe pencil out for the playoffs. Like we're like, all right, Brooklyn's probably not a playoff team. If they make these moves and they blow it up, probably not. Now they are very much a playoff team. Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and Ben Simmons are going to make the playoffs. This is a playoff team, probably a 4 or 5 seed if I had to look at it right now, if I had to guess. But let's just say that like the Mitchell stuff's probably going to happen. Like the latest report is like the Jazz would like RJ Barrett and stuff. And you're like, all right, they're this is happening. And they're just publicly like just feeling each other out on like what the final offer is going to be between Ainge and Leon Rose.
Right.
So we can just move on and say that's going to happen. Okay. Yeah. Brunson and Mitchell, Quentin Grimes, Mitchell Robinson. You look at this Knicks team. Are we sure that's a playoff team in the East? And I know that sounds crazy on the surface, but now that Brooklyn's there, let's just go through the list right now.
Yeah.
Are the Knicks better than the Bulls next year, even with Mitchell and Brunson?
I don't know. I really have no idea what to make of the Bulls. But that's sort of what we're talking. I think that's sort of in the area, right? Is sort of that Bulls area, just sort of right on the cusp.
Okay, so that's one.
Yeah.
And are we in agreement that the Bulls are probably a playoff team next year?
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
There's some weird injury stuff with them, but who knows? Yeah.
The Nets.
You said 4th or 5th. I think they're probably going to be in the 2nd or 3rd kind of area. So yeah, I think Brooklyn
I would say 2nd or 3rd if I was under the assumption that the big 3 are going to play 80 or 70 to 80 games. I think Kyrie's playing 60 forever. I think he's done. Yeah. I think Kyrie is done with more than 60 games. The fact that got out like the contract stuff where he wants like 62 games in his contract or something.
Right.
I think he's out. Like that.
The one thing I'll say with Kyrie is it is a contract year for him. And so does he just sort of give it all for one more year and then gets that contract? Maybe he plays 78 games this year and he's like, what are you guys talking about? Like it was just the COVID thing from a couple of years ago. I'm a baller. I'm going to be out there. I'm going to be out on the court whenever I can. And they're just like, yeah, you know what? You're right, Kyrie. We had a nice season. You were out there. Forget the games played guarantee in the contract. We don't need it. And then boom, 40 games a year after that.
That I can see too. Goodness gracious. So we'll throw in the Nets there too.
Yeah.
The Bucks, obviously, right? Like the Bucks are obviously in. So that's 3. The Heat, I think are obviously in. That's 4. The Sixers, I think are obviously in. Yeah. That's 5. Mm-hmm. Then it's the Celtics, another one, obviously in. So that's 6 right there, obviously in. That's now in play-in territory for the Knicks. Even if you make the big splash for Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson, you're going to be fighting for your life against the Raptors, the Hawks, the Cavs. Like those 3, I mean, there is no guarantee the Knicks are a playoff team, even if they trade for Brunson or they trade for Mitchell and sign Brunson. Like, isn't that wild? Like the East is so top heavy and so loaded through like 9 to 10 teams that I'm like, that's kind of wild that you could sign Jalen Brunson, who was a really important, great player for the Mavs this past year, and trade for top 20 player in Donovan Mitchell and still look at the landscape of the East and be like, I'm having to squint a little bit to see if the Knicks are for sure not a play-in team. Like that will be, I mean, that's an amazing situation for the NBA. If we have a play-in situation where it's Hawks, Knicks, based on the fuck Trae Young stuff and everything like that would be tremendous television if we have a situation like that. But that is a real scenario here.
It is. I think part of it is that the fit isn't great. And now I'm not one of these people that say you can't trade for Donovan Mitchell because you already have Jalen Brunson. To me, if you're the Knicks, that makes 0 sense. Just go get the super talented players and then figure it out, right? Like fit is a first world problem, and the Knicks right now are not a first world organization, right? Like that is not a thing that they need to worry about. Just go get the talent, figure it out later. But yeah, it's a little weird. Look, I don't know if I'm ready to write in Chicago, but like Toronto to me, that's an obvious playoff team. And so once you get past that first 6 or 7, yeah, you're just in play-in range, and based on the play-in tournament, you might not make the playoffs if you make the play-in tournament, right? I think Orlando is going to be kind of sneaky good. Like, who knows? They could surprise people with Paolo Banchero and some of the depth that they have. And they have players who are sort of primed to make some leaps based on their career arcs. And so the Cleveland thing, I wonder if sort of the novelty of the 3 big lineup sort of wears off and people kind of figure them out the way that I know Jared Allen got hurt late in the year, and that really hurt them. But it did also feel like a little bit that they were figured out as the year went on. So I think the Knicks are right there, but to your point, it's a good one. I hadn't thought about it like that. Like, you get 2 all-star caliber players on your team, and you're still just sort of like, "Nah, might make the playoffs." Like, you were
Yeah.
just in that might make the playoff range. Does Julius Randle have a bounce back year? You got to imagine it can't get worse, but who knows? I like
It
some
should
of the other
help.
moves.
Not
Like,
as
I
much
like,
pressure, right? Like, he's not the guy. Like,
right.
that should help.
Yeah, and if you're able to, like, keep RJ Barrett in that deal, which who knows,
Mhm.
and he takes a leap, then you're really talking about something there. I like the Isaiah Hartenstein addition that they made, so that's nice, but that's not a guy that, like, carries you to the playoffs, obviously.
Mhm.
So I don't know. They're gonna have guys who could play offense. Can Tom Thibodeau get enough of that defense where you're able to make up with some of the deficiencies that you have with a smaller backcourt and things like that? Possibly, but yeah, it's crazy. I would not pencil in the Knicks in the playoffs at all. Like, I would not assume that they make the playoffs.
It's wild times. Sorry, Knicks fans, but hey, at least it's fun. Like, I think that's a
Yeah.
guarantee thing where Mike Breen and Clyde will have a fun time calling Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson games in New York, at the very least. Miami, though, team you're
Mm.
quite familiar with, Wes. I have a couple questions for you about Miami right now. How wise is it to expect the Heat to keep this thing humming as a collective unit without any changes? We talked about the Celtics and why they had to at least think about it. And we see just continuity, 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 but they are still dipping their toes in other guys. They're seeing like, oh, what's the KD offer look like? What can we do? Like, Pat Riley and company are always looking at their options, but also totally content with where they're at. But I just think of it is so interesting because so much has been asked of Jimmy the last couple years, and he has burned a lot of rubber, lot of time and a lot of minutes in Miami. And I love Jimmy to death. And I look at this team and I just wonder, they're gonna basically run it back with the same guys. This is the same core, the same pieces, like not even just same core, same depth, same rotation guys. Like, this is gonna look
Yeah.
nearly identical to the team that was right there once again at the precipice of making the NBA finals. But we just don't see this very often where you build off the bubble, you go to the NBA finals in the bubble, and then you don't, like, ever since we just haven't seen the fall off yet of just the mileage catching up to Miami. It just hasn't happened. Do you start to wonder if it's this year where that starts to that balance becomes due in Miami?
Yeah. That to me is sort of the overwhelming sentiment with the Heat is it just sort of feels like at some point the limping just turns into falling over, right?
Yep.
Where you're limping to the finals over and over and over. Yeah, Jimmy Butler bent over near the stanchion. And
Yeah.
just like at some point the wheels just got to come off, right? And I don't know. Jimmy Butler has mastered the art of saving it for the playoffs, right?
Mm.
Like, the dude doesn't even take 3-pointers in the regular season, and all of a sudden just starts doing them in the postseason, maybe to
Mhm.
save his legs. Who knows? Doesn't play 70 games in a year and hasn't, but for 2 times in his entire career. Um, so maybe that's part of it, but like, they did lose PJ Tucker, and that was a really big loss. And it wasn't a big loss because PJ Tucker is so good, and he is very
Mhm.
good, but more because they didn't replace him. They don't have a real power forward on the roster right now, and they're projected to start Caleb Martin at the 4. And I like Caleb Martin. He's a nice player, but he's 6'5", and he's not a power forward, not even a little bit. And so I don't know where they go. To me, this is a team that is ripe to make a move, and everything that they have said, you're right. Like, it's just sort of weird that that they've been standing pat, but they've been standing pat in order to sort of gather their chips in anticipation of moving those chips into the middle of the table in some sort of all-in move. And they tried to do it with KD. They kicked the tires on Donovan Mitchell, realized that they were not going to get close to what the Knicks were offering because they simply cannot. They don't have the draft picks or the capital or the asset base.
They're also just not that desperate.
And they're also not that desperate. But they are desperate to a degree to add a star. Like everything they have done has telegraphed the fact that this front office believes that they need a co-star next to Jimmy Butler. That Bam Adebayo is not that player. That Tyler Herro is not that player yet and may never become that player. And that they are looking to maximize this championship window that Jimmy Butler right now is propping open with basically one arm and a broken leg. And it to me is it is baffling because I don't know that we've ever seen a team get that close to the finals 2 years removed from being in the finals and feel like that they're not and still sort of operate as a team that wasn't a shot away from making the NBA finals. Like they're operating like Philadelphia was the team operating like they were that team this offseason where yeah, knock the PJ Tucker contract, but whatever. If it leads you to a championship, I don't care if you're paying him $10 million when he's 4 years old. You got to the finals. They're trading draft picks for depth players on draft night. Like the Heat kept all their draft picks. They let PJ Tucker walk so that they can maintain cap flexibility. And they're operating as if they were so much further away, that they are a star away from getting to where they want to go, which leads me to believe that this front office didn't really buy into the run last year, that they don't really believe that they're the team that they were last season, that they're that desperate to get a superstar that they would be willing to take the step back that they have. And it's not, again, I don't mean to overstate like just losing PJ Tucker. Like this is a team that can make a trade in the middle of the season, get a starting caliber power forward, and you're just sort of rolling with what you had last year. But Brooklyn's going to be better than they were last year. Like that was the nightmare worst case scenario for the Nets last season. Just based on regression to the mean, it'll be a better season for the Nets next year. Boston's not going anywhere. Milwaukee's not going anywhere. Philadelphia got better. Atlanta presumably got better. The Knicks are getting marginally better, I guess. And so you're the Heat. You haven't really improved your team. Everybody else is improving around you. That's a step back. And I just wonder, like, what's going to give, right? Like, are you going to go fully into the Bam Adebayo, Tyler Herro window of this thing and just say, you know what, whatever we do with Jimmy Butler is what we do, and we're fine with it? Or do you start making moves with these draft picks? Or are you going to just still wait for some other superstar to shake loose and make another run at that superstar, where it was very obvious that this last round of superstar trades, you didn't have enough stuff to go get those guys. And so are you going to hold on to your limited amount of resources anyway and potentially waste this opportunity? I don't know. It's a crazy predicament that the Heat front office is in, but just based on their actions, it feels like they're waiting for another shot at another superstar.
Do you think they call the Lakers about AD and LeBron with Bam and Herro and company?
I wonder if they would call about Anthony Davis.
Right?
I just don't know what it would cost. Like, would you really part with Bam Adebayo for Anthony Davis, given that that Bam is like what, 5 years younger and much less injury prone? Like, that's a tough deal to make. And that, again, like you had Kevin Durant right there in front of you, and you weren't willing to part with Bam Adebayo for Kevin Durant.
It reminds me of the Kevin Durant, Jalen Brown thing.
Right. And it's like, so if you're not going to trade Bam for KD, who is a clear, like that guy maximize, if you put KD and Jimmy Butler together, there is a way to maybe figure it out. Now, yeah, you have two older players with some injury, some complicated injury history that would be troublesome and stuff like that. And one injury and you're done. Like you have no depth anymore. And Bam is the fulcrum of that defense. But I don't know. Like if you didn't move Bam for KD, you're not going to, I have a hard time seeing Pat Riley moving Bam for Anthony Davis.
Well, speaking of Bam, like this is also something to monitor, right? Like, do we just assume he and Herro are just happy with their roles and what they're asked to do in this Miami offense year over year? Like, are we just assuming that they're going to be fine with just how they're used in Miami for another year? What would be your guess on how they see their roles and how likely they are to be happy for another full year in Miami?
I think Bam's good. Bam's happy with his role. I have no issues with that. No concerns. The Tyler Herro thing is interesting because he basically said at the end of the season press conference that he expects to start next year, that he feels that he has already earned that starting job. And then Pat Riley spoke like a week or two after that and was like, you haven't earned it, basically. And I'm paraphrasing here,
Mm.
but said that he has to get much better on defense and all these other things. And so Tyler Hero is going to have to win that starting shooting guard spot in training camp.
Hmm.
And I do think that there's a decent amount of pressure being applied to Miami's front office for Tyler Hero to start. And I also think that there's a motivation by Miami's coaching staff and front office to see what it looks like for Tyler Hero to start at the 2 guard. But if Tyler's not starting next year and he's coming off the bench again, that's something that would be a concern if you're the Heat's front office, because you want to keep this guy happy. And he clearly wants to start. He has been very public about that. He's told me that, like, on one-on-one interviews multiple times, as well as
Mhm.
other reporters and people in the media. So he hasn't been shy about it. And I do wonder, like, if the Heat don't give him that opportunity, does he start to look for that opportunity elsewhere? He's also due for an extension before the start
Mhm.
of the season. All indications are that they will give him that extension that's going to pay him somewhere around $20 million a year or north even of that. All right, you're going to bring that guy off your bench? No, you're not. At some point, the $20 million a year player is going to start for you. And so I think we're just all the stars are aligning for Tyler Hero to start. So that to me is less of a concern. The biggest concern is what does that look like? Because they tried starting him a couple years ago, granted at the point guard position over Goran Dragic. Within 2 weeks, he basically failed the exam and he went back to the bench and Goran Dragic went back into the starting lineup. I think with Kyle Lowry there, he's not going to take his spot there, but I think he's a 2 guard. I think that's been pretty obvious. But what does that look like next to a ball dominant player like Jimmy Butler, next to a guy like Bam Adebayo who still needs to get his touches and probably needs to get more touches than he has over the last couple of years? Kyle Lowry, who's still the traditional type of point guard, who's going to be running offense for you. What does that all look like? We'll see, but that's sort of the next step in Tyler Hero's development is just sort of figuring out how to play alongside those guys and not just being this sort of Lou Williams style 6 man who, when the starters are off the court, he can float your offense for a few minutes. He's going to have to learn to play next to those guys, as much as the Heat's coaching staff is going to have to trust him with that starting spot.
You mentioned Lowry too. I think Lowry and Oladipo fall into this category together, where I'm kind of curious for different reasons. Where Kyle Lowry obviously not healthy when they needed him to be healthy last year, and you look at his age, you look at just the more wear and tear on Kyle Lowry's body. Great player, but Lowry was supposed to be like that kind of guy to make life easier for Jimmy in the playoffs. Like the whole point was like, come playoff
Yeah.
time, like we'll conserve Kyle Lowry. Come playoff time, he'll be ready to go. And then right away in the Hawks series, and I mean that could have gone a different way if the Hawks were in a little bit better position, where it's like, oh, we don't have Kyle Lowry and we need him in the series against Trae and company. But now you have another year. He's a year older. Like, would you guess Miami's feeling good about their Kyle Lowry investment at this point? Like, that was kind of, and he's kind of just seemingly overlooked in all of this. Is this that, like, we talk about star chasing in Miami, and I mean, they were looking at it as like, we got to the finals with just what we had, like we talked about 2 years ago. And you're like, well, Kyle Lowry should be like this. Lowry, Bam, and Jimmy Butler, and just our depth, that's a pretty good group of guys who can win the East. Like that's a
Right.
pretty good group. We feel pretty good about what we've assembled there. Um, I don't know. Like, is it time to panic on the Kyle Lowry stuff and just that he deserves a lot more kind of, or maybe the front office deserves more criticism for investing in Lowry at this point? And that was just like, now you're kind of stuck for a little bit because Kyle
Right.
Lowry's not really tradable either.
So about a year ago, I bought this stock. It's a medical company stock.
Mhm.
I was doing the stock market stuff,
Okay.
and I felt really good about it. And ever since I bought that stock, I've lost probably 50% of my money on that stock,
Oh, no.
and so it's not doing very hot. But I won't sell it. I
Mm.
won't sell it because what's the point? What's the point? I already lost 50% of my money. What's the difference? I'm just going to hold on to it and hope that it bounces back. And by the way, as soon as it gets back to anywhere close to what I bought it at, I'm selling it. I'm getting out of it. I'm selling it, and I'm getting as
Mhm.
close to my money back as possible. That's where I think the Heat are with Kyle Lowry. I think
Mm.
the Heat invested in Kyle Lowry, hoping that they were going to get one thing. Immediately, it turned out to not be that thing. Kyle Lowry, that first season in Miami, I don't know how you view that than anything other than a disappointment. It was a
Mhm.
disappointment. But can you get a little bit healthier? Pat Riley challenged him at his end of season press conference to get into world class shape. I think Kyle Lowry heard that message. We've seen the videos and the Instagram pics of him looking ripped and all this stuff. And by the way, just this is a pattern with Kyle Lowry. It's like every other year in Toronto, it was get back in shape. He would get in shape and then have an awesome season. And then next year, it'd kind of get out of shape and then have a bad year. And then it was just sort of this on-off thing with him. And I think that's just sort of his MO. And I think we're going to see that in Miami. But as soon as Kyle Lowry starts to rebuild some of that value, I could see Miami maybe exploring trying to trade him to get something back, or maybe the way that pops is, hey, we get one more good year out of him. If he's better than he was last year, if he could sort of be the running mate next to Jimmy Butler that we hoped he could be, then maybe all of a sudden this need for a second sort of all-star player goes away because Kyle Lowry is going to be that player. We maximize the championship window. Maybe we get back to the NBA Finals. And then at that point, Kyle Lowry is an expiring contract going into next year that you can more easily flip as opposed to a player with 2 years left on his deal. So I think that's sort of where Miami is they're just hoping for one more good run out of Kyle Lowry, just like I'm hoping for like one more good run out of that stock. And then you just sort of figure it out at its highest point of value.
That's interesting. Is there any, what would you guess the odds of Victor Oladipo getting close to what his, just being in the Miami system, coming back and just seeing what was out there and being like, all right, he's just so fascinating. Part of it for me is just that I can never let go the Pacers first round series against Miami or Cleveland years ago, and just seeing what I saw, and I've just been a Victor guy forever, that I'm like, that it took a lot for him to be like, hey, you're not in the rotation, but we might need you in the rotation with injuries or something else, so just stay ready. And he stayed ready. I think he deserves credit for kind of acquiescing to the Miami culture and just having to deal with the stuff that Duncan Robinson's like. I think of the James Franco gif, first time of just being out of the rotation and just being expected to be a starter and then an important player right after that. Shout out to the coworker Duncan Robinson over here at Blue Wire. But I don't know. I think that's something I wonder, as you with you being plugged into Miami, is there any hope or any expectation that Victor could actually play a significant role next year, and that with a full offseason in Miami and just being healthy could actually be a really big factor going into next year?
I think that is the hope. I think going into last year, they sort of viewed him as the X factor too. And even at the deadline where they didn't make any moves, they sort of viewed getting Oladipo back as the move that could sort of get them over the top in the Eastern Conference. And Vic, because of injuries and needs, did play a very important role for them in the playoffs. I just don't know that he can ever be. And by the way, they are very excited that he's getting a full summer and he's going to have his first training camp with the Heat since they traded for him. This will be his first training camp. So he'll have an opportunity to sort of carve out a more meaningful role, and they'll be able to see, the coaching staff will be able to see sort of where they want to put him. Another reason why you move Tyler Herro into the starting lineup is sort of you free that 6-man spot open for Vic. I really like the work that he's put in. I think he's really impressed the organization with how he's stayed ready and how he's sort of responded to the adversity that he's had to respond to. I don't think that could be overstated enough, but I don't know that it'll ever be. And he keeps saying, I can get back to all NBA. I can get back to being an all-star level. And I just don't know that that's in the cards for him. Not necessarily because the talent isn't there. I just don't know that that opportunity is there. I don't know that there's a team, the Heat included, that can just afford to be like, here's the keys, man. Let's see if you are still an all-star. What team is doing that for Victor Oladipo at this point? So much of this league is opportunity plus talent, and it sort of equals production, right? And so I think he's talented, but also last year we saw him sort of morph into a different player. He wasn't this, all NBA defensive sort of stopper. I think he had moments on ball against Jaylen Brown. He got a bunch of steals, but also Jaylen Brown just sort of gave up the ball a bunch of times too. So I think that was a little overstated to how well Oladipo was defending Jaylen Brown in the conference finals. But I think he's a good defender. I think as a coaching staff, you trust him because he's a veteran and he has the track record and he knows where to be and he's not bad at it. I just don't think he's all NBA the way that he was. And then offensively, he still's got that slash and kick ability, but he doesn't have that same first step. He doesn't have that same finishing ability. He's not the high flyer that he was before all these injuries. And so I think he's just going to morph into a little bit of a different player. To me, this reminds me of sort of late stage Andre Iguodala when he went from sort of even in Denver and then went to Golden State. He was an all-star in Philadelphia, but maybe he was always sort of playing one class higher than he was in sort of the tier of players. and he had that opportunity in Philly, showed out, put up a bunch of numbers, went to an all-star game, but ultimately found his best value. And I think will be known as a guy who played at like this sort of skeleton keys type of role that he just unlocked all these interesting lineups. And I could see him, Oladipo, playing a similar role for Miami and then going forward in his career, whether it's with the Heat or another team. Like, he's super versatile. He gives you a lot of things that you need. He's more than willing to take a shot, more than willing to put the ball on the floor and dribble and make things happen. And he's an earnest defender. And I think all that stuff is really valuable. I just don't know that he's ever going to get that opportunity to be the player that he still thinks that he is. But if you could do that in a more condensed version with 6-man minutes, that's an extremely valuable player. And I think that's what the hope is for Miami, is that's what they're going to get from Vic.
And that's a really good option. That makes life a lot easier for this Miami backcourt, and kind of feeling out where things are going. And like, if injuries are part of next year, like, hey, a healthy Vic goes a long way, especially if that's his transition at this point in his career. We'll end on this. Playing this game every week. Contenders or not, because I get a lot of pushback on this, Wes, where I've exited out. Like, it's not, I'm a no fun police. I enjoy watching the Memphis Grizzlies play basketball. I have also just X'd them off with this core as a contender. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think you're ever going to get 120 games out of Jaren Jackson and Ja Morant. I don't think you're ever going to get the two of them healthy at the same time for the length that you need them both to be healthy to make this all work. Does that mean that they can't be fun and have a lot of straight playoff appearances, like an MVP for Ja at some point? Jaren Jackson still to be a really good player. Yeah. It's a bummer because I think Jaren Jackson and Ja like have an unbelievable ceiling together if you just can be like NBA 2K and turn injuries off. But when you look at this group, because there are going to be people this offseason where it's like, who could win the West? I think there are going to be people who put the Grizzlies in the contender category. Like, they can win the title next year. Do you put the Grizzlies in the contender title next year?
Well, before I answer that, so you're playing this game. So have you already crossed off other teams as contenders?
Yes.
Is this sort of a okay. So what teams have you crossed off other than Memphis?
The Nets.
Okay.
I've crossed off, like, just the sustainability of the off the court stuff where I'm like, no, I won't do it. The Lakers I've crossed off. I don't think they have the depth. The Lakers have no path to their health. Like, the depth's just gone. Like, when you traded for Russell Westbrook, that was it. Like, the depth is over. You're not getting 100+ game. Like, we've already seen it. Like, AD and LeBron in this group, like, they're not playing 82. Like, you're going to be a 7 or 8 seed.
Anderson's your third best player. You got a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just not happening. So they're out. So those are a couple of the big ones that I've already X'd out of, like, teams you're going to see on the list who can win the title next year. And you're like, oh, these people are very confused. They're not winning the title. There's no path.
So I love Ja Morant.
Mm-hmm.
I would never say that the Grizzlies can't win without that dude has that it factor. He is dominant. Once he figures out that, and this was the thing that was a little bit maddening. I know he got hurt in the Golden State series, but even before he got injured, like, if you're a Grizzlies fan watching that series, like, why was he taking 11 threes a game? Like, that dude scored every time he was within 5 feet of the basket. Why? And Golden State could do nothing to keep him from getting to within 5 feet of the basket. So I was just like, why aren't you doing that every single time? I think once Ja Morant sort of figures that part out of his game, and it like, you know, what's he the best in the league at? It's that. It's like him and Giannis, basically, like the two guys that are most similar. And I guess Zion, if he were healthy. I like Desmond Bane a lot. I like the depth. The one thing is the Jaren Jackson thing, and I couldn't figure out why he was off limits in the Kevin Durant trade. If the Shams report was like that, to me was like a get out of jail free card for them.
I
it was
agree
like,
with you 100%.
We could just trade Jaren Jackson, get out of this problem, get Kevin Durant, win a championship early in Ja Morant's career. Kevin Durant retires into the sunset or whatever, and then we're just riding the fumes of that forever. Yeah, and you're Memphis. You have an opportunity. Like, this whole that's why that was a fake report, and I'm so annoyed with like this weird intel kind of reporting thing that we do, because like it comes out, Memphis is a quiet contender for Kevin Durant, but they won't trade Desmond Bane or Jaren Jackson. It's like, well, it doesn't really feel like they're a contender because
the Hawks are a contender because they threw out John Collins and DeAndre Hunter. It's like, what? They're not a contender.
But you're going to trade Zaire Williams and Steven Adams for Kevin Durant? Was that the plan? Was that the offer you made? No, you were never a real contender for Kevin Durant. Anyway, I wonder if Jaren Jackson can get healthy. We've seen it before. Guys like Steph Curry and Joel Embiid, where it's just like, It's just never going to happen. You can't picture them playing 17 games in a year and then suddenly they do. I wonder if that's still in the cards for Jaren Jackson. If he does, I won't rule it out. He's still really young. If he could stay healthy, I think Ja Morant's only going to continue to get better. Desmond Bane's awesome. They have a lot of depth, and they are, I think, one of these other teams that could, if they wanted to, make a move at the deadline that could bolster some of that stuff around those three guys. I'm not going to say that they're not contenders, but I probably wouldn't put them in the same tier as some of the upper crust teams of the West right now.
Jaren Jackson played 78 games last year. Career high for him. Then obviously the rough injury, the playoffs, gone until looks like January, around that time, late December, January for his return. And then it's just like he missed all the offseason. So just whatever he's going to be next year is just not going to be what it could be, because you're getting acclimated and thrown into the fire middle of the year, and maybe it's just not going to happen. Like, it's rough for him. Bad timing, everything. Before that, 4 games in 2020, 2021 started 57 in 2019, 2020, and 56 in 2018, 2019. So we have 4 years.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on it. Yeah, I'm not betting on him getting healthy and being like good to go. But
then you look at Ja too, man.
Yeah.
Ja played 67 his rookie year, 63 2020, 2021, and 57 this past year.
They should have made the Durant trade, man.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, when people throw them out, I'm like, where are the games coming from? We've already seen, like, this is the time they should be playing all the games. Like, they're young. This is it. Like, if you're going to make the case, like, health is number one. Like, that's an advantage of a young team, is that they don't have the wear and tear, and that they have the bodies to do this. It's just, I don't see it. Like,
there's real chemistry between Jaren Jackson and Ja Morant that I think will help carry them. And if they can get healthy, and they are healthy by the time the playoffs roll around, I just think that Ja is so good that you can't take them off the board. Like, I'm not willing to cross them out, but I'm not putting any money on them either. Right? Like, I just can't cross them off. I just can't do it. You're probably right. I would be shocked if they were winning the championship this year, but I can't do it. I can't do that to my guy Ja. Can't do it.
I mean, they bring in my dude Kennedy Chandler from Tennessee.
Yeah.
They're cool. Like, I love everybody on this roster. I love how this team is built. And again, Grizzlies fans, like, it's not a shot against you guys. It's just that, like, you've built your team around 2 guys that I just don't think are ever going to be healthy enough to make that deep of a run. That's why, like you said, they'd get out of jail free card with Kevin Durant, where, I mean, maybe it's Bradley Beal. You look at it and you're like, hey, Washington's up. They want to create their own injury-riddled Twin Towers with Jaren Jackson and Kristaps Porzingis. That's what they're aiming for. They're just going to create that. We'll give you Bradley Beal and company. It's like, yeah, you do that immediately.
KD was perfect. It was he played the right position. He was at the right point in his career. And Ja Morant was in the right point of his career. He would have been beloved in Memphis. Yep. And by the way, Memphis is a really cool city. It kind of gets knocked as a small market NBA city. It's one of my favorite NBA cities. I love Memphis. It is a good time there. And the fans, if you win, they love you. We just saw that with Ja Morant. They freaking love that guy. And you can sell jerseys. Ja Morant's a top 10, top 5 in jersey sales. Yeah, you could be a dude there. It's a quick private jet to the Northeast from Memphis if you still want to do your production stuff. I don't know. That to me felt like, not to bring everything back to the Miami Heat, but when they made the playoffs with that early Dwayne Wade team, it was D Wade, Caron Butler, Lamar Odom, Brian Grant, like a really cool, feel good team. And Dwayne Wade was clearly ascending. And then they say, you know what? We have a chance with this young guy. Let's give him the pieces. We think he's ready right now to win a championship. And going into D Wade's second year, they traded for Shaq. They traded the young guy, Caron Butler, who they loved, and his upside, traded him. Traded Lamar Odom, who they had was the big free agent guy that they got the year before, had a great year for them, but with just 1 year, they traded him to the Lakers and all these other pieces and draft picks, by the way, too. And they went ahead and got Shaq. And Shaq was good for basically 2 years, basically a year and a half, but he was good for 2 years for them. And what did they do? They won the championship in that second season. Probably could have won it in the first season had D Wade not gotten hurt in the playoffs. Won the championship that second year. And then basically Shaq falls off. He's way overpaid those last couple of years. They end up having to trade him to Phoenix for Sean Marion and other pieces and all this stuff. But you got a championship. But more importantly, you went from a sort of new team that didn't have much history to a team that all of a sudden was one of the rare NBA teams that has an NBA championship, that has champions on the roster with an ascending young star who's going to probably be a star for the next decade plus. All of a sudden, like if you're the Grizzlies and you trade, you're just the Grizzlies. Nobody respects you. You didn't make the most out of the grit and grind era, even though it was fun for everybody involved. But like, you're just the Grizzlies. You're just a team, and you have a great player in John Morant. You can make the Durant trade, go win a put all the cards on the table. Try to go win a championship with KD. Yeah, maybe the third and fourth year of his contract don't look great, but you can flip him for something else. And now you're a championship organization. Now you're a team that has that cachet and that respectability in the league, and it just elevates you to a whole other plane. You start making money as an ownership group, and now you can start spending more money into the luxury tax, which is why they just traded all these players in the first place, is because they don't make that much money relative to these other NBA teams. Like, I don't know. To me, I don't know if the Jaren Jackson thing was just enough to get it done, but that was a no-brainer for so many reasons. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
I agree with you. We'll see what happens, but your final answer, contender, yes. Grizzlies.
You know what? Yeah, contender, yes, but like they would have been the favorite if they would have made the Durant trade, and isn't that the difference?
That is true. Wes, what can the good folks check out from you across Locked On Heat, Locked On NBA, RIP Substack? What can the good folks look out from you?
Subscribe to the Substack, wesgoldberg.substack.com for updates on what's going on with that. But yeah, listen to the podcast, Locked On Heat, Locked On NBA every Thursday night / Friday morning, and a whole bunch of other stuff coming.
There you go. Very excited to see what unfolds for you, man. And I will be reading, and let's check back in again soon.
Sounds good.